Well, folks, we had a great successful episode the other day on our 40th episode. We got a guest back on, and I'm not sure what's going on. It's tis the season to not show up for podcast recording, unfortunately, on our 41st episode. I'm not sure my guest is. They're not here, but you know what? I don't want to hold you guys up as my audience. I want to get to talking about some movies so we can get you to the theaters to go see said movies, right? So, three movies to talk about tonight, really quick. We've got first things first, one that on paper seemed like really good, but then when you see who the studio is, you kind of like cringe a little and you're like, ah, shit. It's called The Shift. It's like a kind of a multiversal movie where a man, for lack of a better term, loses out on the love of his life, and he's kind of offered different opportunities to sort of get her back. But and I mean, I always preface this by saying, I have nothing against, religious groups or organizations, provided you're upfront about what you're doing. But I'm slowly seeing that Angel Studios is not one of the studios that wants to be upfront about what they're doing. So they got some big names. They got Sean Astin of, Lord of the Rings fame. We got Neil McDonough of like Arrowverse fame, Speed the Devil. Sean Astin was like the kind of like the best friend of the main character in the movie, and essentially they find a way. I didn't know that there was a way to turn like a multiversal love story into like a Christian slanted story, but they found a way. um and I hate to like pitch it that way because I don't want people who aren't interested in Christian films to be put off by this. If anything, this should help you. This should, drive you to the theaters to go see this movie. But essentially, it's the Book of Job, in a more modern setting with like sci-fi, overtones and technology. That's kind of oversimplified in a way to have big sci-fi science um with the devil and I guess illusions of God in there as well. I think if they had approached this as a typical sci-fi movie and strayed away from giving it justification via religion, this probably could have been a better movie, especially because Neil McDonough makes a great bad guy. Um, he actually did still do pretty good, even with that curveball that he was thrown. I'm sure. Actually, then again, actors are given scripts; they know what they're getting into. But he played the role very well, much like he has as past bad guys in other things. Unfortunately, it just like it falls apart when you get to a point in the film and you realize you've been slightly misled. I wish the trailer or even on paper had been a little bit more honest about the fact that they wanted to make this like a religious based movie. I'm always happy to support creators of any kind when they want to be honest. When you have to like trick people into seeing your thing though, that's a no for me, dog. So I did watch it though, and I had to give it a two. It's a 2 out of 5. It's just not. It works better on paper than it does in practice, unfortunately. But the good news is that's the low end of the movies that we're talking about today. If you're interested, the trailer for The Shift is in the comments, well, in the description. You can leave me your comment about what you think of the trailer, though. Number two out of the three movies that we're gonna talk about was Silent Night. This is a new John Woo movie. Anybody who's not familiar with him, he's big into like the revenge action genre as best as I can put it. I almost want to call it revenge porn. Because that's kind of what you're getting. Kind of like when you get murder porn, it's all just like people getting killed. I mean, this is a derivation of that where you've got somebody who's been wronged to a point where they just don't care about life anymore except for getting revenge. And God, I wish I remembered the actor's name because I feel like I'm disrespecting him by just saying he's the guy who played Rick Flag in Suicide Squad 1 and 2. But it's led by the guy who played Rick Flag in Suicide Squad 1 and 2, except when the person he cares about is taken from him, he also loses the use of his vocal cords. And because of that, we went with the name Silent Night. The only thing about this movie that like it it seemed like a good like creative decision to make it so he doesn't speak. So his it's all about kind of reading his actions and emotions. The part where they lose you is they make it so nobody in the film speaks. And I mean, like, there's other sounds and other things going on. So it doesn't make sense that no one else speaks, because all of their larynxes are intact. So it almost sort of takes away from the trauma that the main character has gone through if the whole world is silent. Um, or else why did we need to take away his you know anatomical ability to speak? You could have just made the whole movie with him being quiet and just not talking by choice. So because of that, it definitely takes you out of the film some. The action sequences are still great. He has a reason for doing what he does, and he does it, but it follows a pretty typical formula. So for that reason, and for the odd choice that they went with in terms of like the speaking of the other characters in the movie that could have spoken, this one we went with a 3 out of 5. It'll scratch that itch that you might have for, a horror, well, not a horror film, but like an action movie where you just want to see the guy be a badass. In the pros column for this movie, I will say very it's very realistic, his training methodology to get to where he needs to exact his revenge. He has to work out at home. He does stuff like YouTube videos to figure certain things out. It seemed a lot like what your average person would go through to train and get ready for said revenge. The only downside, again, you got to suspend your disbelief when you're getting to some parts of movies like this. He starts, has no job. He's like home in grief, but he's like pulling out wads of cash to pay for all the things that he needs to, his car, his weapons, his things like that. So it kind of gets to the point where you're like, where did you get all this money, Mr. Man who's not working due to grief? Hmm. But if you don't take it too seriously and you go into it looking strictly for, an action revenge movie, you're going to get exactly what you want and be satisfied, I believe. All right, so that was 2 out of 3. Last one. Um, any of you watching, if you're into anime, if you're into Hayao Miyazaki, big name in the anime film world, he's been gracing us with his like wonderful animated films for decades. Um, Classics like Princess Mononoke, Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle. I mean, the list just goes on. Um, so he released his last film about a decade ago, and then in about 2017, there started to be murmurs of him working on something new. And you know, if you're a fan, you're excited. You're like, hey, I want more. But when you're a really big fan, you kind of have to stop and think to yourself, do I want do I want him to just keep going on forever and ever without a finite end? And then earlier in the year, in the summer, they finally released the new film. And in Japan, they took a very unique approach to releasing this movie. There was no trailer, no synopsis, just a name and a very vague poster. And the name was The Boy and the Heron. I had chills walking out of the movies last night. I shared this with some people. I see a lot of films. I'm interested in lots of films, but I'm not super excited. You know, I was very excited for this, and I don't think it disappointed by any means. Um, before I say really anything specific about the movie, I heard after wrapping of the film completed, Miyazaki-san started returning to the studio, and he's back at work again. In kind of what I was talking about a second ago about the choice between a finite end or not. Um, I I'll always want more from Miyazaki, and I'm sure any fans of his work will agree. But at the same time, The Boy and the Heron felt very, very finite, very, very much like the end. And if we didn't get more, or God forbid we lose him and he doesn't finish whatever he's working on now, I don't think that The Boy and the Heron's a bad place to leave off on. He poured so much love and so much of the themes and messages that he's put into other films, but all into one in this, and it shows. You know, things like flight, fantasy. I mean, legacy. Legacy was a big theme in The Boy and the Heron. I don't want to really sit and just summarize the movie to you, but what I'll say is that it it just feels like a Miyazaki movie in every way. It feels like the high fantasy, high stakes, personal, emotional masterpieces that he's known for. Um, I do intend to see it again, only because I did have to see it in Japanese to see it in an early showing of it. But there is a dubbed version with a very stacked cast, with with names like Willem Dafoe, Mark Hamill, Christian Bale, Batista. It's loaded. But imagine if you would losing somebody that's really close to you. You know, one of the closest possible people that any person could have, and you're forced to move on against your will and relocate your life all at the age of 12. And you are given a form of escape, not necessarily to another world, but things where you are presented to you in a way that let you avoid the reality that you've come to have to deal with. And there are fantasy elements added in there that eventually sort of make it a trip through time and space and different worlds. But for Miyazaki, I've always felt like these things are metaphors. They are provided to help us understand um, simple, basic things, but in a grand, fantastic way. And the message gets across. I don't think anybody walked out of the theater not understanding what they saw. The ending is a little bit, to some, maybe controversial, not because of any particular content, but just how it ends. I think that's for each of their own to judge. One of the things that I'm really happy about for The Boy and the Heron, though, is when it does release this Friday, the 9th, I believe, it is a wide release. It should be in most everybody's theaters. This is a hot take, considering what we have in the pipeline: Wonka, Aquaman, Color Purple, all that. I think this is the movie that you need to see for Christmas and or before Christmas. But if you're gonna take time out of your Christmas season to go with family, friends to go see a movie, I think this is the one. I gave it 5 stars. Five, there you are. And I stand by that. Stand by that number. I've got a written review posted to in the summary. In addition to the trailers, there is a link to my Letterboxd where I do all the written reviews for these movies as well. So I give a little bit more in terms of my thoughts there. But for this week coming up, this is the one to see. I can't recommend this one enough. So if you're any kind of Miyazaki fan, you'll enjoy it. I don't quite know where to stack this one in terms of like how good it is compared to other things, but there will be time for that later. For now, just go absorb it and enjoy it. After you watch it, comment, let me know what you thought. If you loved it, if you hated it, same for The Shift or for Silent Night. I'm always looking for that feedback from you guys, right? Let me know if my recommendations helped you or hurt you in any way. I will be happy to adjust and work, to help guide you guys to movies in a better way if there needs to be a change. But that's it, guys. When it's just you and me, we get through these real quick. I do prefer when we have guests to discourse with. Again, unfortunately, my guest is a no-show tonight, so I'm glad that I got to spend this time with you and share these movies with you guys. This has been another episode of Movies in Minutes, and I will catch you guys on the next one.
Baby, I bought into the fantasy with you.